In 1947, the history of the United States entered a new and powerful phase. The world had just emerged from the devastation of World War II, but peace did not mean stability. Instead, a new global rivalry was beginning to form between the United States and the Soviet Union. This year is often seen as the early foundation of the Cold War era. One of the most important developments was the introduction of the Truman Doctrine, which marked America's commitment to stopping the spread of communism around the world. It reshaped U.S. foreign policy for decades. Another major step was the National Security Act of 1947, which reorganized the military and created key institutions like the Department of Defense and the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. These changes strengthened America's national security system. In addition, the Cold War tensions were becoming clearer as relations between the United States and the Soviet Union grew increasingly hostile. At the same time, plans for European recovery, such as the Marshall Plan, were being developed to rebuild war-torn nations and prevent the spread of instability. Overall, 1947 was a turning point that shaped America's global role as a superpower and set the stage for much of modern international politics. The year 1947 became one of the most important turning points in the history of the United States because it marked the beginning of the Cold War. After World War II ended in 1945, many countries hoped the world would remain peaceful. However, tensions quickly grew between the United States and the Soviet Union because both nations had very different political and economic systems. The United States supported democracy and capitalism, while the Soviet Union promoted communism and a one-party system. In 1947, these differences became more serious and visible. American leaders feared that communism would spread across Europe and other parts of the world. At the same time, the Soviet Union was expanding its influence in Eastern Europe by supporting communist governments. This created distrust and competition between the two superpowers. One major event that showed the beginning of the Cold War was the announcement of the Truman Doctrine by President Harry S. Truman. Through this policy, the United States promised to support countries that were threatened by communism. America provided financial and military aid to nations such as Greece and Turkey to prevent communist influence from spreading there. Another important development was the growing division of Europe into two political sides. Western European countries generally supported the United States, while Eastern European nations came under Soviet control. This division increased fear, suspicion, and rivalry between both powers. Governments began investing heavily in military strength, intelligence systems, and international alliances. The year 1947 also saw the rise of anti-communist feelings inside America. Many citizens and political leaders believed communism was a danger to national security and freedom. This fear influenced government decisions, foreign policy, media, and public opinion throughout the Cold War period. In 1947, the Truman Doctrine became one of the most significant policies in the history of the United States. It was introduced by President Harry S. Truman during a time when the world was facing political uncertainty after World War II. Many European countries were economically weak, politically unstable, and vulnerable to outside influence. American leaders feared that communist movements supported by the Soviet Union could take control in different regions. The Truman Doctrine was officially announced on March 12, 1947, when President Truman addressed the United States Congress. In his speech, he asked for economic and military aid for Greece and Turkey. Greece was experiencing a civil war between the government and communist groups, while Turkey was under pressure from the Soviet Union. Truman believed that if these countries fell under communist control, nearby nations might also be affected. This idea later became known as the domino effect. The main goal of the Truman Doctrine was to contain communism and stop its spread around the world. It marked a major change in American foreign policy because the United States decided to take a more active role in international affairs. Before this period, America often avoided deep involvement in European conflicts, but the Truman Doctrine showed that the country was now willing to intervene politically, economically, and militarily to protect its interests and allies. Under this policy, the United States provided millions of dollars in aid to Greece and Turkey. The support included weapons, financial assistance, training, and economic help. American officials believed that strong economies and stable governments would make countries less likely to support communism. This policy also increased America's influence in Europe and the Middle East. The Truman Doctrine became the foundation of many future American actions during the Cold War. It influenced later programs and alliances designed to resist Soviet expansion. The policy also strengthened the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, as both nations competed for influence in different parts of the world. Many historians consider the Truman Doctrine the official beginning of America's strategy of containment during the Cold War era. The National Security Act of 1947 was one of the most important laws passed in the history of the United States after World War II. It was signed into law by President Harry S. Truman on July 26, 1947. The main purpose of this act was to reorganize and strengthen America's military and national defense system during a time of growing international tension and fear of communist expansion. After World War II, American leaders realized that the country needed a stronger and more coordinated defense structure. During the war, communication problems and lack of coordination between military branches had created difficulties. At the same time, relations with the Soviet Union were becoming increasingly hostile, and the beginning of the Cold War created concerns about national security. The National Security Act completely changed the organization of the American military system. One of its biggest changes was the creation of the Department of Defense, which brought together different military branches under one central authority. Before this act, the Army and Navy operated separately, often competing with each other. The law improved cooperation and allowed the military to respond more effectively to threats. Another major result of the act was the establishment of the United States Air Force as an independent military branch. Before 1947, air operations were controlled by the Army. However, military leaders recognized the growing importance of air power after World War II, especially with the development of advanced aircraft and nuclear weapons. Creating a separate air force showed how modern warfare was changing. The act also created the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, one of the most powerful intelligence organizations in the world. The CIA was formed to collect information, study foreign threats, and provide intelligence to the American government. During the Cold War, intelligence became extremely important because the United States and the Soviet Union were competing politically, militarily, and technologically. The CIA later played a major role in international events, secret operations, and global espionage activities. In addition, the law established the National Security Council, NSC, which was designed to help the president make important decisions about defense and foreign policy. The NSC brought together top government officials, military leaders, and advisors to discuss national security matters and international crises. The National Security Act of 1947 greatly increased the power and global influence of the United States. It prepared the country for long-term competition during the Cold War and created institutions that still play a major role in American defense and intelligence today. The act marked the beginning of a more organized, modern, and globally active American security system. In 1947, the United States began developing a powerful post-war global strategy that would shape international politics for many decades. After the destruction caused by World War II, many countries in Europe and Asia were facing economic collapse, unemployment, food shortages, damaged industries, and political instability. American leaders believed that if these problems continued, communist movements supported by the Soviet Union could gain power in weakened nations. To prevent this situation, the United States decided to take an active leadership role in rebuilding and stabilizing the world economy. American policymakers understood that strong economies and stable governments were important for maintaining peace and stopping the spread of communism. This approach became a central part of America's foreign policy during the early Cold War years. One of the most important developments in 1947 was the planning of the Marshall Plan, officially known as the European Recovery Program. It was proposed by American Secretary of State George C. Marshall. The plan aimed to provide massive financial aid to European countries so they could rebuild their economies, industries, transportation systems, and infrastructure destroyed during the war. The United States believed that economic recovery would reduce poverty, unemployment, and social unrest in Europe. American leaders feared that desperate populations might support communist parties if economic conditions did not improve. Through financial support, food supplies, machinery, and industrial assistance, the Marshall Plan helped many Western European countries recover more quickly. This post-war strategy also increased America's influence around the world. The United States became a major political, economic, and military leader in international affairs. Many countries began depending on American financial support, trade, and protection. At the same time, the Soviet Union viewed these actions as an attempt by America to expand its power and influence in Europe. In addition to economic recovery efforts, the United States strengthened relationships with democratic nations and encouraged international cooperation. American leaders supported organizations and agreements that promoted global stability, trade, and security. The country also expanded its military presence in different regions to protect allies and maintain influence during the growing Cold War rivalry. The post-war global strategy of 1947 marked the beginning of America's role as a worldwide superpower. It showed that the United States was no longer focused only on domestic issues or regional affairs, but was now deeply involved in shaping global politics, economic systems, and international security. In conclusion, the year 1947 was a major turning point in the history of the United States and the modern world. Important events such as the beginning of the Cold War, the introduction of the Truman Doctrine, the passing of the National Security Act of 1947, and America's post-war global strategy changed the direction of international politics forever. These developments strengthened America's role as a global superpower and increased its influence in military, economic, and political affairs. The decisions made in 1947 not only shaped the future of the United States, but also affected the lives of millions of people around the world during the Cold War era and beyond.